If you're tired of your bass lines never using more than just root notes, then there's something you need to try. It's not learning complex theory, and it's not doing hours and hours of practice. It's a simple concept you can use to make great bass lines that work in any style, and it's so powerful that it created a standout moment on one of the biggest selling albums of all time. But before I can show you what this concept is, we first got to break the bad habit that's been keeping you stuck on just using root notes for years. So, what's the bad habit? Well, one of the first questions I get asked by new students, whether they want to improvise or they want to learn to write their own bass lines, is how do I play more than just the root note? Now, this is a good question, but as soon as these students tell me what they've tried, I can immediately see where they're going wrong. Now, before we go any further, quick side note. If this is something you've been struggling with for a while, I've put together a free email series called 30 Days to Gig Level Bass Playing. It walks you through how to fix these exact problems step by step. It's linked below and it's really good, so go and grab it and then come back to this. Now, let me show you what the problem is. For demonstration purposes, let's say this is our normal root note bass line that these students are working on. And this is what most bass players mean when they say, I've tried using stuff other than the root note. And none of that sounds bad, but something does just feel a bit weird. The extra notes feel a little bit out of place, and the whole thing feels so strange that eventually you think, okay, well, I'll just go back to playing root notes because they're safer. There's definitely something deeper going on here. And the way I usually explain that to students is with a really simple analogy. Think of building a bass line as being like telling a joke. Now, every good joke has got two parts. It's got a setup, which on its own isn't that exciting, and then there's the punchline, which is the moment everyone laughs at and everyone remembers. Now, because of this, you might think the punchline is the most important part, but if you were to just shout out a random punchline with no setup, and then the man turned to his wife and said, well, I didn't invent penicillin, it's not funny, it's just confusing. That is exactly what's happening when you're trying to drop these random extra notes or cool notes into a bass line without any setup. They are like musical punchlines with nothing leading into them. So they sound random, they sound mechanical. You feel like you're overplaying, and because of all of that, you retreat back to just playing root notes. Not because they are better, but because they are safer. The real reason you can't play more than root notes and make them sound good is because you don't know how to set them up yet. But the good news is, that's exactly what we're going to learn next. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to break this into two parts. In a little while, we're going to learn how to nail the perfect punchline moment in a bass line that sounds really musical and turns everybody's head. But before you can learn that, you first need to learn how to set those moments up. And the best way to learn that is by looking at a bass line that did this perfectly on one of the biggest selling albums of all time. So the song we're going to study is Let Down by Radiohead, which was from their 1997 album OK Computer. Now, at first that might seem like a really strange choice because when you listen through, you hear a lot of root notes. But when you listen a little bit deeper, you learn that this is all part of the perfect setup. And to explain why, let's go back to our joke analogy for a second. So broadly speaking, we know jokes have two parts. They have a setup and a punchline. The point of a setup in a joke is not to be funny. It's to set expectations and get us oriented so the punchline can work its magic later on. When someone gives us a setup and says, why did the chicken cross the road? We don't want to laugh yet. We don't want a clever twist yet. We don't want a payoff. We just want to know what world we're in. Chicken, road, chicken wants to cross the road, got it. Our expectations have been set. And it's this setting of expectations that Radiohead's bassist Colin Greenwood does perfectly. When you listen through to the first verse and chorus, it sounds like Colin is mostly taking the safe option and just playing root notes. But he's not doing that to play it safe. He's doing it so the listener can get used to the song. By keeping the bass line clear and full of root notes at this point, the listener has space to hear what the chords sound like, to lock in with the groove, to understand the shape of a verse and the chorus, and learn what the bass usually does in this song. So by the end of the first chorus, the listener is thinking, great, I know what a verse sounds like, I know what a chorus sounds like, I understand this song. That's the setup, and root notes are perfect for this job. The audience is now comfortable. But that same comfort is what's about to make this next moment really special. Because now the setup is complete and the listener feels comfortable, the bass is free to break the pattern the listener thinks they understand, and in doing so, deliver an incredible punchline that sounds amazing, moves away from root notes, and adds real depth to the song. So, how does it happen? The bass line in the second verse starts out very similar to the first. We still have a lot of root notes, this time with a little bit more decoration, and still a fairly simple rhythm. However, just before we go into the second chorus, something really interesting happens. When Colin is moving down to the final E chord from F sharp minor, instead of going down to play an E underneath that E chord, he actually moves up to play G sharp. That's the punchline, and it sounds amazing, but it would be a huge mistake to walk away from this thinking that the lesson here is just play the third of the chord sometimes. If you reduce this moment down to a single note choice, then you're back to square one, just randomly dropping in extra notes to your bass lines and hoping that they sound good. That's not what's giving this moment its power, so let me explain what is. With jokes, the reason we love a good punchline is because they subvert our expectations. The setup leads us to believe one thing, but when we get a good punchline, we look back and realize it subverted our expectations all along. And it's this idea of contrast that is key to understanding why this moment is so powerful. What the bass is incredible at doing is creating these huge contrasts over long periods of time. And that is exactly what Colin Greenwood is doing here. In the first verse and chorus, he sticks to playing root notes because his role in the band is really clear. He's anchoring the harmony, he's defining some level of normality with the chords, and he's helping the listener really learn the song. But by the second verse, the listener knows the form, they know the chords, and they know what the bass usually does. The listener expects to hear all of this again, so later on, when Colin doesn't reset back to the root and subtly changes the harmony by playing the third, it feels huge. Not because the note choice is really exotic, but because his role has changed. He shifts away from anchoring the harmony to gently disrupting it. And all of that impact comes from Colin making us hear a contrast between what we hear now versus what we heard before. So here's the concept to take away from this. If you want to move away from playing root notes and have it sound musical, then stop thinking about just adding more notes. And instead, start thinking about creating contrast over time. A really practical way to train this is simple. When you're playing a song, use the first verse and chorus to keep things clear and predictable. Let the listener learn the song. Then in the later sections, give yourself permission to slightly change the bass's role and disrupt things with some slightly more adventurous note choices. If you've done the work of creating a good setup, that's when non-root note choices start to sound really musical and really intentional. Because sometimes sometimes ultimately the notes themselves don't matter. What really makes the difference is understanding when and why you should play them. And that is when your bass lines stop sounding random and start adding real depth to the music. Now, the next thing that's going to make a big difference to your bass playing is clicking on this video and watching it up here. YouTube suggests you watch it. YouTube is smart. You're incredibly smart. So click up here and watch that next.